All right, welcome to another episode of Talking Metaverse, presented by Immersive. I'm Tan, and I'm joined by my colleague Matthias. How's it going, Matthias? Where are you right now in the world?
Hello, hello. Greetings from Hong Kong. Just came back
Yes.
from Tokyo last week.
Nice. All right, so now I would like to introduce our guest from AT&T, Mr. Igor Glubochansky. Welcome to the podcast, Igor.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So Igor, if when you meet somebody new and then they ask, "Hey, what do you do?" How do you respond?
In short, I work in marketing. So my role is to understand consumers and what they would like to do, how they can benefit from connectivity, whether it's 5G or fiber. And that's all I think about all day, how we can create products that make them more productive and entertained, excited, and ultimately enjoy fast and reliable connectivity.
So you don't mention anything about I work with the metaverse, anything like that?
I actually do. It's a great conversation starter. Everybody is, heard about Metaverse these days, even among, friends and colleagues. But most people still don't really understand what it means and what it could really do. So that may be my second, paragraph in the introduction. But I think we also need to understand, why we're doing it. It's not Metaverse for the sake of it. It's to create better experiences in our consumer lives, maybe improve some business process, and those are intertwined. So it really comes as the second one. It's not about metaverse or nothing. It's just more about how we can create better products for communication. Sure.
To understand how big thing Metaverse is in US, is it like from scale to like from 1 to 10? How would you define that? How big hype there is in US?
I think in the US, and I can speak from both the research that we've seen and we've done, as well as kind of personal experience. The majority of consumers and business decision makers as well, not only heard about metaverse, but maybe 60% of them think it's going to be big. It's going to be as big as social media apps today. It's going to be big as kind of mainstream enterprise systems today. But at the same time, if you ask them what specifically will it do you understand it fully? I think the majority would say that they don't understand it. So it means that there is probably something there, but it's going to happen over time. And I think it's already been happening gradually as different elements of the metaverse have been kind of emerging in different apps, in different applications, in different experiences that we experience every day, but it's not widespread, and there is still a lot of elements that need to be laid out by the industry that are not quite ready for it to be fully adopted. But also looking at some of the same data globally, we see much the same level of understanding and awareness in other countries as well. So it's not just a US phenomenon.
Okay, so this might be a good point to ask you a question that we ask all our guests. Igor, do you think it's possible to define the metaverse in one sentence?
I think it's not only possible, but it's kind of been done.
Oh,
Classical definition by Matthew Ball and over the years, and he updated it a bit in his book in terms of the interconnected network of immersive experiences, and ultimately it's the next generation of the internet, or three-dimensional, more immersive, more interactive. It could be decentralized, decentralized, and I realize that it's more than one sentence, but you can probably squeeze it into one. Now, that said, the definition doesn't really tell you what it does in the practical sense. Whether you're enjoying a tourism trip in 3D and that is metaverse, or you may be at work, doing something really detailed with augmented reality. Those are different elements. I don't think about them as a metaverse when I, put on a VR goggles and do something in them, whether it's play or socialize. But the theory behind it is pretty solid. If you really believe in it, and it's going to take hold over the next 10 years, it's going to fundamentally change everything we do and then how we live. But it's going to take time.
What is, Igor, like from your point of view, the most exciting immersive experience what you have tried or what you have heard about?
I would say it's social. I started experimenting with different VR applications, and I noticed there is a lot of apps where you can kind of go in, whether it's in VR or it could be even on the phone, where you could kind of socialize with friends and coworkers. It didn't really hit me until our team decided to do our staff meetings in VR, and you would actually spend an hour not only talking and looking at different entertaining kind of material, but also doing some work with presentations. So I think we bonded together as a team quite a bit more. And since we're all working in the space, we understood what others and consumers potentially experiencing. After that, I went into a lot of other worlds with VR to experience even more sort of fast-moving experiences, not just sitting in the room. And those really prompted a lot of thoughts about what products we could develop to make these experiences better with 5G. Because all of these things are, for the most part, static where you're sitting in the room. You may be moving a little bit in the social and even some fitness experiences there, and they're all kind of similar. But you're not going to do it for a long time. So what we thought about this is, like, look, you will need to be doing it while you're mobile, and the demands for connectivity and latency in these kinds of experiences are going to be huge. So this is where 5G and kind of fiber comes in. To your earlier question about AT&T, there is definitely, as you experience these early apps, whether it's social or work, and you begin to understand them, like, well, my favorite experience is such that I learn a lot. For my job, I actually think about some products and services we can provide with 5G to make it possible to do it not just only in the room, but anywhere.
Okay, I'd like to quickly go back to what you said. So you're saying that at AT&T, you guys have had team meetings wearing VR glasses.
Yes.
That sounds cool.
Collaborative meetings we had. The alternative would have been to do it on Zoom, like we're doing right now, and I have to tell you, it's night and day. You get a lot more done.
Really?
Yeah. I think the engagement level is a lot higher.
Interesting. But you're all in different locations?
Yeah, absolutely. Just anywhere around the United States. All be in the same room. And also the tools are out there, and they're constantly adding them, in terms of, making it an interesting new experience. You definitely can customize your environments. Some teams I've noticed created their virtual room as an exact replica of their conference room that they normally meet in when they travel and kind of meet together. So you start thinking about, like, is it a good way to do it? If you're going to do the metaverse, you might be better off just sort of meeting in the resort or somewhere on the beach. But there is different schools of thoughts on that. I enjoy both ways. On one hand, I'd like to see a replica, a digital twin of our office environment, but maybe I don't want to do it every single time, and I'm going to change it to something else.
But I would assume like this could then reduce lots of traveling if you can do these Teams calls with VR glasses, so you don't have to travel all the time between East Coast and West Coast and so on.
Definitely, one benefit of virtual environments where you can cut down on travel that you don't really need and only reserve travel for things that kind of make sense. Where, as I was saying, those virtual VR meetings and kind of get-togethers, it's not the end of the evolution of the metaverse. This is like what we can experience today. At some point, we're going to all meet together, but also we'll see augmented reality-inspired effects and productivity tools and entertainment items that we can still be together, but we can also experience our environment differently because there will be some, augmented reality to it. So we'll all can be together, but experience it a little bit differently and enjoy it a lot.
And another thing you said, I'd like to ask you about. You said to have you think the longer experiences are going to be when people are moving instead of when people are staying still.
Absolutely, and if you remember the movie Ready Player One, there was a lot of movement, but I have to say that was all happening while the characters were sitting in their basement with the glasses. Everybody was static, and I have to say everybody was poor in real life, but they were enjoying it completely, sitting down, but there was a lot of action. So in real life, you can only do it for a short period of time. And people still like to go out and physically move. And I have to say, Metaverse is experienced kind of longer term for the most part while you're out and about. It's not going to be while you're at your desk or in your basement.
That's interesting, because I would have thought when you're at the desk, you can spend more time. You can spend longer in the metaverse.
I think right now that is very true. That you can probably spend, an hour or two. But if you look at sort of the video games as an equivalent, some people spend a lot of time playing video games, and usually they're teenagers and their parents are not super happy about it. But when you take it kind of broader to a broader set of activities that we all enjoy or we have to do on a daily basis, in the end of the day, kind of longer term, it has to be mobile, which kind of means it has to be enabled by 5G, and you have to be connected like you are today with your smartphone, whether you are checking email or just browsing the internet or using some apps. But longer term, that whole concept of metaverse will have to be experienced while out and about outside, as well as at home. But that means that the apps we have and what we experience today will need to be transformed to be enjoyed anywhere at any time.
Okay. So as more and more use cases are becoming mainstream and more people are getting into this world, what do you need to think about? From AT&T standpoint, for example, like how do you enable more people adopting this? What do you need to think about?
Well, as more use cases emerge, you begin to see more demands on networks that support them. By definition, metaverse is going to be connected, and connected in a kind of a new way, where it's three-dimensional experience. If it's more immersive, it's more interconnected. So it means greater bandwidth and lower latency. And I would translate that in these, fairly technical terms, but I think most people understand them. By bandwidth, we mean, how many megabits per second, and also the reliability of the connection, how many people can connect at the same time. And then latency means the responsiveness. If you remember early networks, maybe you used a BlackBerry on 2G, the response was maybe like a second or half a second. It took a while. You really couldn't check your email on the laptop when you were out and about. Nowadays, but they're talking about milliseconds. We're talking about 30 milliseconds of latency between the time you press the button and the data goes out and comes back. So today's applications, like gaming and streaming, maybe require 100 milliseconds or 50, but with metaverse applications, it has to be quite a bit lower than that. For the three-dimensional experiences, multiplayer games, those staff meetings we do in VR, so you can have a longer meeting maybe and not get a headache. So latency and bandwidth, and it's not often talked about when I think about metaverse. I talk about centralized, decentralized. I talk about different business models. But at the end of the day, what makes or breaks it is they actually can do it at scale. So not only a dozen people can meet for a concert, but millions at the same time, and maybe they're located at the same place, but they would be enjoying it differently. So what we think about is how we can enable the metaverse with 5G, as well as fiber and in-home Wi-Fi. And there is products and services that carriers like AT&T can develop to make that experience better and ultimately create an ecosystem of partners and have the consumers enjoy it, and for us to be able to make those investments and monetize.
Yeah, that's a good point. And people don't always understand what is happening in the background, like what is needed to create like a smooth metaverse experience. And kind of like you have to have the good connection, like 5G and high bandwidth.
Right. And ultimately, the reason we're building those networks is to create an ecosystem of software and hardware partners. And immersive is actually a good example of developers building applications that will take advantage of the bandwidth and latency improvement.
And you also mentioned like your ecosystem. So we have lots of like startups and developers listening our podcast. So how could they reach out to AT&T and like showcase their own metaverse solutions?
Oh, well, AT&T has a great wireless 5G network, as well as fiber with in-home Wi-Fi in the US. And we've been working with many developers to put together some early prototypes and marketing activations for apps that really take advantage of the bandwidth. I would mention a few in the sports area, for example, where augmented reality, whether it's in the stadium or at home viewing and overlaying stats on a game or using multiple angles to enjoy the game a little bit better. There's a number of those apps. We've also worked in the social media space, creating add-on apps for popular social media apps to kind of communicate the benefits of 5G, whether it's latency or bandwidth. And those apps were really entertaining with augmented reality effects and would highlight the latency benefit of 5G. For example, on a video call with a popular app, we created special filters that allowed people to enjoy it a little bit better as the game that interactively kind of overlays different creative elements on our faces, and you can kind of control it by moving your face. So the latency needed for that kind of stuff is certainly a lot more demanding than a regular video call. So those are examples of some of the early prototypes that we work with developers on. There is a lot of commercial apps being developed in the space. So I would say for developers, it's not just about early stage, super, scientific apps. It's come to a mainstream. So you can take from 0 to 1 development and actually be in market with popular apps that make millions or even billions of dollars. If you look at the size of that economy, the GDP of we're talking about, so to speak, in the metaverse, it's very high. It's tens of billions of dollars these days. So for those who are looking to develop, monetization is really there. I mean, it's becoming real. And in working with players like AT&T that have a strong network, certainly makes sense as you begin to develop your app and test it.
So it sounds like that AT&T wants to be more than just data pipeline. You want to create new kind of digital services and products.
Yeah, I would like to really enable an ecosystem, and where 5G is different from previous Gs is there's a lot more collaboration that's going to be possible between the software layer and sort of the communication layer. Because our networks are nowadays more software enabled, they're software based and software defined. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities to use APIs, for example, to customize how the app works on the network. Those will be accessed perhaps through the popular device operating system platforms, but your app can definitely understand more about the network environment these days than it used to. It can call an API and say, do I have 5G or not? How is my environment? There's so many different things you can do developing to make the app really shine and be more aware of the network that it's on. And certainly having strong 5G network, like what we are building, is going to be key for those apps to really shine as well.
Yeah. What is then kind of like your personal opinion that like what kind of roles telcos will take in like in terms of metaverse, let's say in US or Europe or Asia, kind of like what kind of things they might be focusing on?
I mean, we've seen, especially in Asia, carriers become very diversified companies that also play in different areas of life. It's not uncommon for carriers there to have interests outside of the telecom space. With that, they can play in entertainment and in other areas. So they can develop their own metaverses, for example. At the same time, I think the most impact from telecom providers will be in actually building the foundation of the metaverse. Because without the reliable connectivity and 5G specifically, because remember we're talking about, mostly in the long term, this experience will be enjoyed while you're out and about or in mobile. But in-home fiber and in-home Wi-Fi is also important. That's why we're making those investments as well. So while it may be interesting to have early experimentation, and you have to do it like we did to build the ecosystem, to show that are possible, to kind of lead that, in the thought leadership, space. It's very common for companies that sort of provide that intel inside, almost phenomenon, right? Where the network behind the metaverse. It's not uncommon to begin to experiment early and develop your own experience, like we did with the basketball and football and social media apps. But at the end of the day, you have to make those investments in the network. Because without that, metaverse is only going to be possible in a book or in a theory or in a movie.
Yeah, and basically like the network has to be there first, and then you can create something on top of the network.
I think that's right.
And with this kind of powerful paradigm shifting technology, world changing technology, which we're all excited about, are there any drawbacks? Is there anything that we need to be mindful of, to be cautious of moving forward, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think like anything new that's emerging, there is a lot of things to kind of worry about in terms of impact on the society and who has to make investments and monetize and how the ecosystem shakes up. There's a lot of a lot of books and articles written about the evolution of the metaverse and what to watch out for in terms of governance and industry structure. I would say that I spend more time, thinking about the use cases and how we can enable them about technology. But definitely, there is a lot of interesting questions that come up, even in the most recent books about the metaverse and articles about many consultants about how will industry evolve and what regulation do we need and what different safeguards do we have on sort of social behaviors in the metaverse.
Is there then like some specific article or book that someone should read about metaverse?
I was just going to ask the same thing. Do you have a particular favorite?
Well, I'd like to not play favorites. I read maybe quite a few dozen articles and then books as well. Most recently, since I've been working on the space for a couple of years. So I wouldn't recommend any one in particular, but I think if you're interested in the space, definitely expand your horizon by looking at different perspectives. That would be my advice on books.
Matthias?
Yeah, I have to ask Igor that are you more like AR or VR guy?
At this point, I'm more a VR person because you see a lot of these new games and also for work. And it kind of makes sense to really check in every once in a while, and you see something new and something really amazing. So a lot of investment going in that space. You know, when it comes to AR, like all of us, I like filters and social media, and not only because they're working in the space, I think they're really interesting, but you sort of take it more for granted. But I think at the end of the day, those two areas will kind of merge. And as you experience them out and about with 5G, with low latency and high bandwidth, you begin to not really pay attention whether it's AR or VR. I mean, you have the same VR experience anywhere, and it's super high quality, super responsive, and that's where we're going, frankly.
Do you think that someone should regulate Metaverse, kind of like be the big brother?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about maybe is the whole concept of interoperability and how different metaverses can work together. There may or may not be one party that sort of regulates it. It's just so many different technologies and experiences come to life. But you start thinking about like, well, if I have an avatar I created in one game, can I take it to another game? Can there be some way to purchase an item and then it works everywhere? And in the end of the day, where you want it to be fully interconnected, even if you do have to buy an avatar or create one, but a few times, maybe not 100 times, but there may be multiple platforms. But what makes them connected is at least that layer of connectivity, where you don't need to connect to different carrier to enjoy different metaverse. And in the telecom community, we've always been more interconnected and interoperable. There is going to be ubiquitous connectivity worldwide, where with that AT&T 5G phone, you can already go to 100, 200 different destinations worldwide and connect. And so that layer of interoperability is kind of almost already there when it comes to telecom. And I think for other industries that build on top of it, definitely there has to be some interoperability, some common framework for this metaverse to work together.
Otherwise, you can't call it a metaverse.
Yeah, by definition, it has to be interconnected.
Cool. Igor, thank you so much for your time. It was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it as well.